Under the sweltering Texas sun, traffic on Highway 83 slowed to a crawl, but not because of an accident. Something much smaller, much wilder, had brought cars to a halt. A tiny bobcat kitten, desperate and determined, blocked the road, refusing to retreat. Officer Sarah Winters had seen her share of strange calls, but nothing quite like this. As she approached the trembling creature, she realized it wasn't just lost or injured. It was trying to tell them something. And when she saw the glint of metal strapped to its leg, she knew somewhere beyond the horizon, a mystery was waiting. What could a wild bobcat possibly be leading them toward? And why did it seem to be waiting for help? What started as a routine highway patrol would soon uncover a life-or-death mystery that no one saw coming. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. The summer sun beat down on Highway 83 in West Texas, creating shimmering mirages on the asphalt. Traffic moved steadily, trucks and cars heading north toward Abilene or south to San Angelo, their passengers oblivious to the drama unfolding on the roadside. Officer Sarah Winters adjusted her Stetson against the glare. At 34, she'd been with the Texas Department of Public Safety for 11 years. Rarely did wildlife calls warrant immediate attention, but something about this one felt different. Dispatch, this is Unit 247 responding to the wildlife incident at Highway 83, mile marker 143. ETA, 3 minutes, she reported. Roger that, Officer Winters. Be advised, we've had additional calls. Motorists reporting what appears to be a juvenile bobcat displaying unusual behavior. Sarah's interest peaked. In her experience, wild animals typically fled from highways, not toward them. Something wasn't right. She spotted the commotion before she reached the mile marker. A cluster of vehicles pulled onto the shoulder, drivers standing outside taking photos with their phones. Sarah pulled up behind them, lights flashing. A middle-aged man in a faded Cowboys t-shirt was directing others to stay back. Afternoon, sir. Officer Sarah Winters, DPS. Can you tell me what's going on? The man wiped sweat from his brow. Ma'am, there's a baby bobcat over yonder. Been trying to cross for about 20 minutes now. Runs out, then retreats. Almost caused a pile-up when a semi braked hard to avoid it. Anyone try to approach it? No, ma'am. Wild animal and all. Plus, he hesitated. Seems distressed, like it's trying to get our attention or something. Never seen nothing like it. Sarah walked carefully toward the median, hand resting instinctively on her holster. Then she saw it. A small bobcat kitten, no more than a few months old. Its spotted coat dusty from the roadside. It paced nervously, making small darting movements toward the roadway before retreating when vehicles approached. This wasn't an animal randomly crossing a road. It seemed deliberate, almost frantic. Sarah raised her binoculars for a closer look. That's when she noticed it. A small device attached to the cat's hind leg with what appeared to be a blue marker. The bobcat wasn't entirely wild. Sarah made a call to the Regional Fish and Wildlife Office. Within 20 minutes, Dr. Stephen Mitchell arrived, a wiry man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and alert eyes. He'd been the regional wildlife biologist for over 2 decades. Call me Stephen, he said, shaking her hand firmly. Dispatch mentioned a tagged bobcat. That's unusual enough to get me moving. Sarah briefed him as they approached. Stephen raised his binoculars, adjusting the focus. Well, I'll be damned, he muttered. That's not one of ours. What do you mean? Wildlife Services uses specific tracking collars, usually around the neck. This is something different, he continued observing. There's a blue marker attached. Almost looks like... He trailed off, brow furrowing. The bobcat spotted them and, instead of running away, moved closer. It stopped about 30 feet from them, made a small, urgent sound, then turned and took a few steps toward the forest bordering the highway, looking back at them. It wants us to follow, Stephen said, amazement in his voice. Like Lassie? Sarah said skeptically. I know how it sounds, but I've worked with wildlife for 25 years. I've never seen a wild bobcat behave like this. He squinted at the blue marker. That tag, can I borrow your binoculars? Stephen focused intently. There's a number on it. RW7734. His face paled slightly. Sarah, that's not a wildlife tag. That's an emergency location marker. usually issued to hikers in certain parks. Why would a Bobcat have a hiker's location marker? Good question. Let me make a call. Stephen retreated to his truck, returning 5 minutes later with a grave expression. I just spoke with the ranger station at Fortress Ridge State Park. They've had a missing hiker since yesterday. Robert Whitley, 42, experienced outdoorsman, missed his scheduled check-in last night. Sarah's police instincts kicked in. And the marker number? RW are his initials. 7734 was his campsite registration. They both looked at the Bobcat, which was still waiting, occasionally making that same urgent sound. This doesn't make sense, Sarah said. How would a Bobcat end up with a hiker's marker? Stephen pulled out his tablet and tapped through several screens. Here, Ranger records show that Robert Whitley is a wildlife rehabilitator from Austin, specializes in big cats. Sarah looked at the Bobcat with new understanding. So this could be his rescue. Possible, but if that's the case, why is the Bobcat here and Robert isn't? The implication hung between them. The Bobcat made another sound, more insistent this time, and took several more steps toward the forest. I'm going to follow it, Sarah decided. If there's any chance it knows where this hiker is, I'm coming with you, Stephen interrupted. If Robert is injured, we might need medical supplies. Sarah radioed dispatch to update them and request backup. The Bobcat, seeming to sense their decision, turned and trotted toward the tree line, looking back periodically to ensure they were following. Never thought I'd be following a Bobcat into the woods, Sarah muttered. Nature has a way of surprising us, Stephen replied. As they entered the forest, the temperature dropped noticeably under the canopy. The Bobcat stayed about 50 feet ahead, visible enough to follow but maintaining its distance. It's staying on a clear path, Stephen observed. That's another sign this isn't typical behavior. Sarah nodded, her eyes scanning the ground. There, boot prints, recent ones. Stephen knelt to examine them. Good eye. These are fresh, maybe a day old. About a mile into the forest, they came across a clearing where the undergrowth had been disturbed. Broken branches, flattened grass, and most concerning, spots of what appeared to be dried blood on several leaves. Someone passed through here in a hurry, Sarah said. Or fell, Stephen added, pointing to a steep drop-off at the edge of the clearing. The Bobcat had stopped, pacing anxiously at the edge. It approached the drop-off, then looked back at them expectantly. Sarah and Stephen carefully made their way to the edge. Below was a ravine about 30 feet deep with a small stream running along its bottom. And there, partially concealed by a fallen tree, was a human form. Robert, Stephen called out. Robert Whitley! The figure moved slightly, raising an arm. He's alive, Sarah said with relief. She radioed dispatch immediately. We've located the missing hiker. Ravine approximately 1 mile east of Highway 83 at mile marker 143. Subject is alive but injured, requesting immediate medical evacuation. They carefully descended the slope. When they reached the bottom, they found Robert Whitley conscious but clearly in distress. His leg was trapped under the fallen tree, his face pale from exposure and dehydration. But when he saw the Bobcat approach, a weak smile crossed his face. Nova, he whispered. Good girl. The Bobcat, Nova, approached cautiously and nuzzled against Robert's outstretched hand. Stephen immediately began examining Robert while Sarah provided water. Compound fracture of the right tibia, possible concussion, dehydration, Stephen reported, but stable. Robert, can you tell us what happened? Sarah asked. Robert took a shaky breath. I was tracking Nova. She's part of my rehabilitation program, ready for her final wilderness assessment before release. He paused, wincing. Yesterday evening, there was a sudden storm. Lightning struck a tree nearby. Nova bolted, natural reaction. But the same lightning weakened this tree. He gestured weakly to his trapped leg. I couldn't reach my emergency beacon, so I attached my location marker to Nova's tracking harness and told her to find help. Sarah and Stephen exchanged astonished looks. You trained a Bobcat to find help? Sarah asked incredulously. Robert managed a small laugh that turned into a grimace. Not exactly. Nova was found as a very young kitten, raised around humans before I got her. Part of her rehabilitation was learning that roads mean humans. When she's frightened, she still associates roads with safety. His voice filled with pride. I wasn't sure it would work, but I hoped she'd go to the road and someone would notice her tag. Nova had settled next to Robert, her spotted body pressed against his side, watching the newcomers with cautious eyes. "That's incredible," Stephen said, applying a splint to Robert's leg. "You essentially improvised an animal search and rescue." "I had faith in her," Robert said simply. The next hour passed in a blur. The search and rescue team arrived with proper equipment. As they worked to free Robert's leg, Nova remained nearby, watchful but not interfering. As Robert was being carried up the ravine, Nova tried to follow, making small distress sounds. Sarah, acting on instinct, knelt down to the Bobcat's level. "It's okay, girl. He's going to be all right. And you did good. Real good." Nova regarded her with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand more than any wild animal should. The story of Robert Whitley and Nova the Bobcat made headlines. Within days, national news outlets picked up the heartwarming tale of an animal rehabilitator, rescued by the very creature he was preparing to return to the wild. 3 weeks later, Sarah visited Robert at the Austin Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. "Officer Winters," he smiled, extending his hand from his wheelchair, his casted leg propped up. "It's good to finally meet you properly. Call me Sarah. And you were handling a compound fracture better than most people handle a paper cut." "Adrenaline is a wonderful thing," Robert chuckled. "And knowing Nova succeeded, that was better than any painkiller. Want to see her?" They went to a large enclosure where Dr. Mitchell was already waiting. "Stephen's been coming down twice a week," Robert explained. "Says he's never seen anything like her and wants to document her rehabilitation for a research paper." Inside the enclosure, Nova was exploring, her movements graceful and precise. She'd grown noticeably, her kitten proportions giving way to adolescent musculature. When they entered the observation area, Nova immediately approached, focusing particularly on Sarah. "She remembers you," Robert said with surprise. "That's unusual. Bobcats generally don't differentiate between humans unless they've had extensive contact." "What happens to her now?" Sarah asked. Robert exchanged a glance with Stephen. "That's become a complex question. Nova's case has challenged some of our assumptions. Her ability to navigate between wild instincts and human interaction is unique. We're developing a new program," Stephen added. "Wildlife ambassadors, animals that occupy a space between wild and domesticated. They can teach us about their species while helping with conservation education." "And Nova would be your first ambassador," Sarah guessed. "She's a perfect candidate," Robert confirmed. "She has wild instincts but has formed selective bonds with humans, and after her role in the rescue, the public is already invested in her story." They watched as Nova investigated enrichment puzzles, demonstrating impressive problem-solving skills. "The rescue wasn't just a lucky coincidence, was it?" Sarah asked. "You really did train her." Robert shook his head. "Not in the way people assume. You can't train a bobcat like a dog. What I did was work with her natural instincts and create associations. Roads mean humans. Humans mean help when distressed. The tracking device means me." He smiled ruefully. "I honestly didn't know if it would work. It was a desperate attempt." "Well, it saved your life," Sarah said. "And changed hers," Robert added softly. "The publicity from the rescue has brought in enough donations to fund our ambassador program for the next 3 years." "The governor's office called this morning," Stephen interjected. "They want to present both of you with a special commendation at the State Conservation Gala next month." Robert looked embarrassed. "I told them Nova deserves the award, not me." "I believe their response was that they don't have a protocol for giving state honors to bobcats," Stephen laughed. "But they are using Nova's image on a new wildlife conservation license plate." Sarah smiled, remembering the small, desperate bobcat that had blocked traffic just weeks ago. Who could have imagined such a creature would save a life and change how people viewed the relationship between humans and wildlife? "Would you like to feed her?" Robert asked, offering Sarah long tongs with meat secured at the end. Under Robert's guidance, Sarah extended the meat through a feeding port. Nova took it delicately without aggression, then sat and calmly ate while watching Sarah with those intelligent eyes. "I never thought I'd be this close to a wild bobcat," Sarah admitted. "She's teaching us that wild isn't as simple a concept as we once thought," Robert said. "There's a spectrum of behaviors and adaptations. Nova is helping us understand that the line between wild and tame isn't as clear-cut as we imagine. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the crowd at the grand opening of the Texas Wildlife Ambassador Center. The center was impressive, with naturalistic habitats designed to give animals space while allowing visitors to observe them. Nova's habitat was the centerpiece, a spacious enclosure with rocks, trees, and a small stream designed to allow her to interact with researchers and participate in educational programs. Robert, now fully recovered, led the ribbon-cutting ceremony. When he mentioned Sarah's role, he insisted she join him at the podium. Officer Winters represented the best of human compassion that day, he told the crowd. She didn't dismiss a mere animal as unimportant. She recognized intelligence and intent, even when it came in an unexpected form. Afterward, Robert took Sarah to a special observation area where they could see Nova up close. The Bobcat lounged regally on a rock outcropping, seemingly unbothered by admiring visitors. She's become quite the celebrity, Sarah observed. Yes, but more importantly, she's becoming an ambassador for her species, Robert said, his voice filled with quiet pride. People who see her, who hear her story, they're donating to conservation efforts, supporting habitat preservation. One bobcat has done more for Texas wildlife conservation in 6 months than a decade of traditional campaigns. Sarah watched as Nova stretched and repositioned herself, those intelligent eyes scanning the visitors before settling briefly on Sarah with what almost seemed like recognition. "Do you ever wonder what she's thinking?" Sarah asked. Robert smiled. "Every day, but I've learned to respect the mystery. Nova reminds us that animals aren't just simplified versions of humans. They're different, complex in their own ways." As the sun began to set, Sarah reflected on how a routine call about an animal disrupting traffic had cascaded into something that changed so many lives. Robert's, Nova's, her own, and now potentially thousands of visitors who would come to learn about the delicate balance between humans and wildlife. "You know," she said finally, "in 11 years of police work, I've never had a case quite like this one." Robert laughed. "I should hope not. Once in a lifetime is enough for me." They watched in comfortable silence as Nova, the bobcat who had once desperately tried to get human attention on a busy highway, now commanded it effortlessly. Her very presence was a testament to the unexpected ways humans and animals could impact each other's lives. In the fading light, as visitors reluctantly began to leave, Nova rose from her perch and approached the observation glass where Sarah stood. For a moment, those golden eyes met hers, and Sarah felt again that inexplicable connection, a bridge between two worlds, wild and human, each with lessons to teach the other. It was, Sarah thought, a fitting end to an extraordinary story, and perhaps the beginning of many more.